The former home of Queen frontman Freddie Mercury is for sale in London. Built in 1907, the Kensington property features a bar, a library.
What they found in Freddie Mercury's London home shocked his closest friends. Behind a plain green door in one of London's quietest, most exclusive corners, a rock legend built a world that almost nobody was allowed to see. For over a decade, Freddie Mercury lived a double life inside those walls, one where the loudest voice in rock history retreated into near-total silence, surrounded by cats, antiques, and a handful of people he trusted with his life. When he finally let go on November 24, 1991, the people closest to him walked through that house and realized just how much of the real Freddie had been hidden from the world the entire time. This is the story of the man behind the music, and the house that held his secrets. Long before the world knew the name Freddie Mercury, a boy named Farrokh Bulsara was born on September 5, 1946, on the island of Zanzibar, off the coast of East Africa, then still under British colonial rule. His parents, Bomi and Jer Bulsara, were Parsi, members of a small Zoroastrian community with roots in Gujarat, India. Bomi worked as a cashier for the British Cabinet Office, and the family lived a modest, disciplined life shaped by tradition and faith, worlds away from the glitter and chaos that would one day define their son's career. Much of Farrokh's early education took place in India rather than Zanzibar. At around 8 years old, he was sent to St. Peter's, a British-style boarding school near Bombay. It was there that the shy, piano-loving boy started to open up. He learned classical piano, developed an ear so sharp that friends remembered him picking out songs from the radio note for note, and by the age of 12 had formed a school band called the Hectics, covering Little Richard and Cliff Richard for anyone who'd listen. It was also at St. Peter's that his classmates began calling him Freddie, a nickname that would eventually eclipse the name he was born with. By 1963, the family had returned to Zanzibar, but the political climate there was rapidly deteriorating. The following year, the Zanzibar Revolution erupted, a violent overthrow of the Sultan's government that led to mass displacement and violence against the island's Arab and South Asian communities. Like thousands of other families, the Bulsaras fled with almost nothing, resettling in England. They landed first in Feltham, Middlesex, moving between a series of modest homes before settling into ordinary suburban life, a jarring contrast to the tropical world Freddie had grown up in. England, though, is where everything changed. Freddie enrolled at Isleworth Polytechnic and later Ealing Art College, graduating in 1969 with a diploma in graphic design, training that would later show up in the artwork he created for his own band. But art school didn't pay the bills. He worked odd jobs, including a stint handling luggage at Heathrow Airport, and sold second-hand clothes at a stall in Kensington Market alongside a young drummer named Roger Taylor. To Taylor and the others who knew him then, Freddie wasn't yet a rock star. He was just an eccentric, funny, music-obsessed friend who always seemed to know where the next party was, even while privately being described by others as reserved and watchful until he stepped into a performance. Those first attempts at a music career were rocky. He fronted a band called Ibex, which later became Wreckage, playing blues-influenced rock and even living for a time above a pub near Liverpool's famous Penny Lane. When that band dissolved, he tried again with a group called Sour Milk Sea, which also fell apart within months. None of it looked like the beginning of a legend, but each failed band brought him closer to the musicians who would eventually change his life. In 1970, Freddie joined forces with guitarist Brian May and drummer Roger Taylor, who had been playing together in a band called Smile. When bassist John Deacon joined the following year, the classic lineup of Queen was complete. Freddie was the one who pushed for the name, drawn to its boldness and the way it sounded both regal and provocative at once. Around this time, he legally changed his surname from Bulsara to Mercury, stepping fully into the identity the world would come to know. Even before their debut album was released, he designed the now iconic Queen crest himself, weaving together zodiac symbols for each band member beneath a phoenix, a fitting emblem for a group about to rise from obscurity into rock royalty. What followed was one of the most extraordinary songwriting careers in popular music. Freddie's speaking voice sat comfortably in a baritone register, but on stage he pushed into a soaring tenor range that gave Queen a vocal identity unlike any other band of the era. He wrote across an astonishing range of styles, the operatic ambition of Bohemian Rhapsody, the stripped-down rockabilly of Crazy Little Thing Called Love, the stadium-filling simplicity of We Are the Champions. By his own admission, he could barely read sheet music. He composed almost entirely by instinct, sitting at the piano and following whatever idea pulled at him next, refusing to repeat himself from one song to the next. But it was on stage where Freddie became something closer to a force of nature. Musicians and critics alike have long pointed to his ability to command massive crowds with total ease, turning stadiums into something that felt intimate. The clearest example of that power came on July 13, 1985, during Live Aid at Wembley Stadium. In a set lasting barely 20 minutes, Queen delivered what is still widely regarded as one of the greatest live performances in rock history, with Freddie leading a crowd of tens of thousands in call-and-response chants that needed no translation. Just over a year later, in August 1986, Queen played what would become Freddie's final concert with the band at Knebworth Park in front of a crowd estimated at well over 100,000 people. Those close to him say he had quietly told Brian May beforehand that he didn't think he'd be touring much longer. Offstage, Freddie was a study in contradictions. The same man who commanded stadiums in sequins and leather was, by most accounts, private, guarded, and somewhat shy in small settings. He was famously devoted to his cats, reportedly calling home while on tour just to hear them over the phone, and he even dedicated a song to one of his favorites, Delilah. He filled his home with Japanese art and antiques, pouring the same intensity into collecting that he brought to songwriting. And he had a well-documented taste for extravagance. Queen's parties in the 1970s and 80s became the stuff of music industry legend, none more infamous than the lavish, over-the-top bash thrown to celebrate the release of the album Jazz in New Orleans in 1978. Freddie's romantic life was as complex as everything else about him. He's remembered publicly for his relationships with men, but earlier in his life he had significant relationships with women as well. The most important of these was with Mary Austin, whom he met in 1969 while she worked at a boutique in London. The two fell in love quickly and moved in together during Freddie's lean years, with Mary supporting them financially while he pursued music with no guarantee of success. When fame eventually arrived, Freddie proposed to her, but the relationship shifted permanently when he told her he believed he was bisexual and later that he was gay. Their romance ended, but their friendship didn't. Mary remained one of the most important people in his life for the rest of it, working with him, traveling with him, and staying by his side through his final illness. He referred to her as his common-law wife, and in his will he left her his home and a substantial share of his estate. Later relationships included the Austrian actress Barbara Valentin and a German restaurateur named Winnie Kirchberger, with whom he had a serious relationship during his years living partly in Munich. But the most enduring partnership of his later life was with Jim Hutton, an Irish hairdresser he met in a London nightclub in 1985. The two exchanged rings and lived together for years, with Hutton remaining by Freddie's side through his declining health right up until the end. Freddie referred to him as his husband in private, even though same-sex marriage wasn't legally recognized in the UK at the time. Freddie's health began to decline steadily through the late 1980s, though he kept the details fiercely private. His bandmates have said in later interviews that they knew something was wrong long before it was ever discussed openly. Brian May has described an unspoken understanding within the band that they simply didn't press him for details, because Freddie made it clear that this wasn't something he wanted to talk about. His last public performance with Queen came at the Brit Awards in 1990, after which he largely withdrew from public life, spending most of his remaining time inside his London home with only a small circle of people around him, his personal assistant Peter Freestone, his partner Jim Hutton, and Mary Austin. It wasn't until November 23, 1991, just one day before his death, that Freddie made his condition public. Through a statement released by his publicist, he confirmed that he had tested positive for HIV and had been diagnosed with AIDS, explaining that he had chosen to keep it private in order to protect the people closest to him, but that he now felt it was time for the truth to be known. He died the following day, November 24, 1991, from bronchopneumonia brought on by complications of AIDS. He was 45 years old. At a time when AIDS still carried enormous public stigma and fear, his decision to speak openly, even in his final hours, was seen by many as a quietly defiant act, one that helped shift public conversation around the disease at a critical moment. All of this, the fame, the contradictions, the guarded privacy, makes what came next all the more revealing. Because the truest picture of who Freddie Mercury really was, away from the stage lights, wasn't found in an interview or a documentary. It was found behind the green door of his own home. Freddie bought the property in 1980, at the height of Queen's global success, paying roughly £500,000 for a Georgian-style house at 1 Logan Place in Kensington. Friends and staff came to know it simply as Garden Lodge, and for Freddie it wasn't just real estate, it was a sanctuary, a place he could shape entirely around his own taste, insulated from the demands of fame outside its walls. Mary Austin, who remembered walking through that green door with him for the first time, later described the house as feeling instantly peaceful, more like an artist's retreat than a rock star's mansion. Inside, the house reflected every contradiction that defined Freddie himself. It combined ornate Victorian architecture with a calm, deliberate simplicity of Japanese design, a blend that ran through the whole property, from the interiors to the gardens outside. The walls of the entrance were painted a bold saffron yellow, a color Freddie was particularly drawn to and one that carried the same warmth and confidence he brought to the stage. A soaring two-story drawing room housed his piano, the very instrument on which Bohemian Rhapsody and many of Queen's other songs were composed. Upstairs, past a mirrored dressing room where he prepared before public appearances, was his private bedroom, the place where the most flamboyant performer of his generation finally had room to simply rest. Outside, Freddie had personally overseen the design of a Japanese-style garden, complete with koi ponds, sculpted topiary, and magnolia trees. An almost impossible luxury in central Kensington, where private outdoor space of that scale is extremely rare. Those who visited described it as its own kind of hidden world, a green, quiet space tucked entirely out of view from the street. A music room and a private bar both looked out over these gardens, giving Freddie a place to unwind and write surrounded by the greenery he'd designed himself. After Freddie's death, Mary Austin, who inherited the house, chose to preserve it almost exactly as he had left it for years afterward, as though he might walk back into the drawing room at any moment. It wasn't until she eventually decided to part with many of his belongings that the public got its clearest look yet at what filled those rooms. Through a major auction, more than 1,000 items from Freddie's personal collection were sold, with proceeds going to AIDS-related charities. Among the pieces that drew the most attention were a replica of St. Edward's crown and a velvet robe Freddie wore on stage during Queen's 1986 Magic Tour, props he used with a knowing wink at his own reputation as rock's self-crowned king. Handwritten lyrics, stage costumes, and decades' worth of art and antiques Freddie had personally collected all went under the hammer, giving fans and collectors around the world a tangible connection to a private life most of them had never been allowed to glimpse while he was alive. Perhaps the most unexpectedly moving item to be auctioned wasn't a costume or an instrument at all. It was the green front door itself, the one so many fans had visited and covered in handwritten tributes, notes, and messages over the years. When it was finally sold, it fetched a price close to what Freddie had originally paid for the entire house back in 1980, a striking reminder of just how much that single, ordinary object had come to mean to people who never met him but felt like they knew him anyway. By 2024, when Garden Lodge itself was eventually listed for sale, its value had climbed to tens of millions of pounds, a staggering rise from the $500,000 Freddie paid decades earlier, and a testament to both the desirability of the property and the enduring pull of his legacy. Mary Austin, reflecting on her decades living in the house, described it as a place filled with laughter, music, and quiet peace, and said she hoped that whoever eventually took over the house would feel what she and Freddie wanted inside it, not just a home, but a genuine sanctuary. What makes Garden Lodge such a striking part of Freddie Mercury's story isn't just the antiques or the auction prices. It's what the house reveals about the man who built it. In public, he was pure spectacle, sequins, soaring vocals, and a stage presence almost nobody else in rock history has matched. Behind that green door, he was something else entirely, a devoted friend to the handful of people he trusted completely, a lover of quiet gardens and inherited traditions, a collector who filled his rooms with beauty rather than trophies, and, in the end, a man determined to face his final chapter with dignity and on his own terms. Freddie Mercury spent his career convincing the entire world to sing along with him. But it was inside that quiet Kensington house, behind a plain green door, that he built the one place in the world that was entirely, unmistakably his own. If you enjoyed learning more about the real story behind Freddie Mercury's life and home, let us know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this one.